Tied to a tree, pregnant and in a panic, she watched her millionaire husband and his mistress turn her pain into a live spectacle. But the broadcast reached the worst possible destination, her mother's tablet. And that night, the forest would know a mother's fury. If you enjoy stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. The light from the LED ring cut through the gloom of the preserved Blue Ridge forest, creating an artificial stage among the ancient trees of the St. Clair's estate in rural Virginia. The hum of the satellite internet connection was the only modern sound competing with the nightly chorus of crickets and the wind whispering gently through the canopies. In the center of that carefully prepared scene, Marina Hayes stood, her 8-month belly prominent beneath the white linen dress they had insisted she wear. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but shock and confusion robbed her of the ability to react properly. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the surreal situation she found herself in. Before her, holding a state-of-the-art smartphone as if it were a conquered trophy, was Robert Vance, her husband. He wore an immaculate cream linen suit, completely inappropriate for the time and place, and smiled at the small camera with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Marina knew that smile, that posture, that need to be the center of attention. It was the same man who had won her over 5 years ago, with promises of eternal love and financial security. Beside him, Victoria Cole adjusted the angle of the additional lighting, laughing with a nervousness that she tried to disguise as excitement. Her long, perfectly manicured fingers brushed against Robert's arm, seeking approval, seeking confirmation that the plan was working as expected. Marina finally found her voice, though it was weak and trembling. "What's happening, Robert? Why did you bring me here? Why is there a camera? Victoria, what are you doing with my husband?" The questions tumbled out, laden with a growing incredulity. She had trusted him when he said they were going on a romantic walk through her family's land, one last special moment before the baby was born. She had trusted him when he insisted that Victoria, his new executive assistant, needed to accompany them to document the moment for the company's social media. Marina was beginning to realize she had been far too naive. Robert approached her with calculated steps, still keeping the camera positioned to capture her face. "My dearest Marina," he said, with a venomous sweetness that made her blood run cold. "You were always so confident, so certain that our marriage was as solid as the stones of this estate. But today, live for thousands of people, I'm going to show the world who you really are." He paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. This broadcast isn't just a revelation, it's a liberation for me from the commitments you represent, from the provincial life your family tried to impose on me. Miles away, in a living room plunged into the tense silence of a house that should have been full of life, Helen Hayes held a tablet so tightly that her hands began to shake. The screen glowed with the live stream that had appeared on her phone via an anonymous link sent minutes before. The viewer count was climbing vertiginously as the digital world gathered to witness what promised to be a scandal of monumental proportions. Helen saw her daughter Marina standing there, vulnerable and pregnant, and she saw the man who had sworn to protect her family turning an intimate moment into a degrading public spectacle. Helen was not a woman who was easily shaken. At 63, she had faced the loss of her husband, the struggle to keep the family estate running, and Robert's multiple attempts to convince her to sell the ancestral lands. She had always known there was something wrong with that man, something behind the charming smile and grand promises. Marina had fallen in love too quickly, blinded by the charm and the promise of a life different from the rural simplicity she knew. Helen had tried to warn her, but love is deaf to a mother's warnings. Now, watching the broadcast, Helen felt a mixture of rage and determination harden her chest. On the screen, Robert continued his performance. He revealed to the viewers that he was there not only to expose Marina's supposed inadequacies as a wife, but to publicly announce his relationship with Victoria. He talked about how Marina was controlling, how the Hayes family tried to stay relevant through him, how he deserved to be free to live his truth. Victoria, encouraged by the growing audience and the comments appearing on the screen, stepped closer and intertwined her fingers with Robert's. an intimate and provocative gesture captured in high definition. Marina felt her legs weaken. Robert's plan was revealing itself with terrifying clarity. He wasn't just ending the marriage. He was creating a carefully crafted public narrative in which Marina would be portrayed as an unstable and controlling woman, incapable of being a good mother. With this narrative established before thousands of digital witnesses, he planned to sue for full custody of the baby as soon as it was born, claiming Marina was emotionally unfit. The lands of the St. Clair's estate, which were meant to pass to Marina and consequently to the child, could then be claimed by him as part of a favorable custody settlement. It was a coldly calculated plan, executed with the precision of a businessman accustomed to manipulating situations for his benefit. Marina finally understood the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just her heart that was being broken, but her entire future and the future of her child. She looked at Robert, searching for some remnant of the man she had fallen in love with, but found only a stranger wearing a familiar mask. "You planned all of this," she whispered, her voice gradually gaining strength. "You brought me here to my family's land to humiliate me publicly. You think this will get you what you want? The properties, the money, control over my life and my child's life?" Robert smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Exactly, Marina. And the best part is, it's all being documented. Every word you say, every reaction. When you start screaming, crying, despairing, as I know you will, I'll have irrefutable proof of your emotional instability." Victoria nodded in agreement, her role in the plan now completely clear. She wasn't just the mistress, she was the chosen witness, the woman who would be portrayed as the stabilizing influence in contrast to the hysterical wife. However, Robert's arrogance was his first mistake. As he panned the camera to show the vastness of the property he believed he was about to control, he inadvertently captured a specific moss-covered stone landmark in the background, a unique rock formation known as Cross Rock. Helen, watching from the car that was now speeding down a dirt road, recognized the location immediately. She knew exactly where they were, the North Clearing, less than 2 miles from where she had just passed through the estate's main gate. The sense of powerlessness that had dominated her while watching the broadcast began to dissipate, replaced by an iron will. She wasn't just watching a distant stream, she was minutes away from being there. The car's engine roared, devouring the distance along the trails Helen had known since childhood. As she drove, she kept the tablet balanced on the dashboard, her eyes alternating between the bumpy road and the live stream. On the screen, Victoria had begun asking Marina pointed questions. Questions clearly rehearsed to provoke emotional responses. Don't you think it's selfish to want to keep Robert trapped in a marriage that clearly doesn't make him happy? Do you really believe you can be a good mother when you can't even keep your own husband interested? The words were like knives designed to wound and provoke. Marina felt tears begin to form, but something inside her resisted. She thought of her mother, of Helen, who had raised 3 children alone after being widowed, who had kept the estate productive through droughts and economic crises, who had never crumbled in the face of adversity. Marina carried that same blood, that same strength. She took a deep breath, placed a protective hand on her belly, and faced the camera directly. "You two are pathetic," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "You think humiliating me publicly will legitimize this farce? You think a judge will look at this broadcast and see anything other than your calculated cruelty?" Marina's reaction caught Robert off guard. He had expected tears, expected a breakdown, expected validation of his unstable wife narrative. Instead, he saw strength. Victoria, realizing the plan was starting to unravel, tried to intensify the provocation. She moved closer to Marina and began making comments about her appearance, about how pregnancy had changed her body, about how Robert deserved someone who took better care of herself. The words were cruel and superficial, designed to target the deepest insecurities of any pregnant woman. It was at that moment that the sound of an engine being pushed to its limit echoed through the forest, not from the phone's speakers, but from the real world around them. Robert paused, looking into the darkness beyond the circle of light created by the equipment. The broadcast captured his momentary confusion. As a pair of headlights swept through the trees, approaching rapidly. Helen's car didn't slow down. She knew these trails intimately and knew exactly how far she could push the vehicle. When she finally stopped, just a few feet from the illuminated clearing, she got out with a determination that made Robert instinctively take a step back. Helen Hayes was not a physically imposing woman, but there was a presence about her that commanded respect. Her grey hair was tied in a practical bun, and she wore the simple clothes of someone who had spent the day managing the estate. But her eyes, the same dark brown shade as Marina's, blazed with an intensity that made even Victoria hesitate. Robert, trying to regain control of the situation, turned the camera toward Helen. "Look, everyone, the controlling mother-in-law has arrived to interrupt us," he said with false joviality. "Maybe now you can see where Marina gets her issues from." Helen completely ignored the comment and walked straight to Marina. "Daughter, are you all right? Is the baby all right?" Her hands found Marina's face, checking, comforting, anchoring. Marina nodded, but Helen could see the trauma in her daughter's eyes, the painful realization that the man she loved was capable of such cruelty. Helen then turned to Robert, and when she spoke her voice was low but carried an undeniable authority. "You made a terrible mistake today, Robert Vance. You thought that humiliating my daughter publicly would give you power over her, over us, over these lands. But what you really did was show your true character to the entire world." Robert laughed, still confident in his plan. "And what are you going to do about it, Helen? This stream is being watched by thousands of people. I have witnesses, I have documentation. Marina is clearly disturbed. And when the baby is born, I will ensure he grows up in a stable environment, away from this suffocating family." He made a broad gesture with his arm, encompassing the surrounding forest. "And as for these precious lands, well, they'll be sold to cover the costs of the custody battle and the divorce. I already have interested buyers." Victoria smiled beside him, clearly pleased with how events were unfolding. Helen maintained her calm expression, but internally, she was processing information rapidly. She had built an entire life on the ability to read people and situations, to anticipate moves and plan counterattacks. Robert had made his second mistake by underestimating her. "You speak of these lands as if they were already yours," she said slowly. "But you've forgotten an important detail. The St. Clair's estate does not belong to Marina. It has never belonged to Marina. These lands are held in a family trust established 3 generations ago with very specific clauses about inheritance and management." The confidence on Robert's face faltered slightly. Helen continued, her voice gaining strength. "Marina cannot sell these lands, nor can she transfer them in a divorce settlement. They automatically pass to the next generation, to the baby, but under fiduciary administration until the child turns 25. And the current trustee of that trust," she paused significantly, "is me. You never had legal access to these properties, Robert. Your entire plan was built on a false premise." The silence that followed was heavy. Victoria looked at Robert, confusion replacing her previous confident expression. Robert, in turn, seemed to be processing the information, his mind working quickly to find a way out. But Helen wasn't finished. "And as for the baby's custody," she said, walking slowly around Robert as she spoke, as if giving a lecture, "do you really believe a judge will look at this broadcast and see Marina as the unstable party? You orchestrated a public event to humiliate your pregnant wife, brought your mistress to participate, all on her family's land. You didn't create evidence against Marina. You created evidence against yourself." The realization began to dawn on Robert's face. Helen took her own phone from her pocket and held it up for everyone to see. "I have been recording this broadcast from the beginning," she explained. "I have screenshots of every comment, of every moment. I have you admitting your plan to use this farce to win custody. I have Victoria actively participating in the attempt to degrade a pregnant woman. And most importantly," she looked directly into the camera Robert was still holding, "I have thousands of digital witnesses who saw all of this happen in real time." Marina, who had remained quiet while her mother spoke, felt a wave of gratitude and love. Helen had always been her rock, her protector. But at that moment, Marina saw her mother in a new light. It wasn't just maternal protection, it was strategy, it was intelligence, it was the accumulated power of decades of experience in a world that constantly underestimated strong women. Robert tried one last gambit. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost its previous conviction. "All I did was try to have an honest conversation about my marriage. If Marina chose to feel humiliated, that's a matter of perspective." Helen smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "Robert, you just admitted on your own broadcast that you plan to use this event to build a custody case. You detailed your plan to sell properties you have no legal right to touch. And you did it all with your mistress by your side, mocking the woman carrying your child. The perspective here is quite clear." Victoria finally found her voice, and there was panic in it now. "I didn't know," she began to say. "Robert told me it was just to document the end of his marriage, that it was all consensual." But the lie was too transparent, and Helen simply ignored her. The focus needed to remain on protecting Marina and ensuring the baby would be born into a safe and stable environment. Helen approached Marina again and gently took her arm. "Let's go, daughter. You don't need to be here another second." Marina nodded, letting her mother guide her toward the car. But before leaving the illuminated area completely, she turned one last time to Robert. "I loved you," she said, and there was genuine sadness in her voice. "I truly believed we would build a life together, but you turned our love into a cruel power game. The baby and I deserve more than that. We deserve dignity, respect, and true love, things you are clearly incapable of giving." Marina's words echoed through the clearing like a final judgment. And for the first time since the terrible evening began, Robert Vance seemed genuinely shaken. Helen led her daughter to the car, helping her into the passenger seat with maternal care. The baby was moving. Marina could feel him kicking gently, as if he too were eager to escape the toxic situation. Helen closed the door firmly and turned one last time to Robert and Victoria, who remained paralyzed in the illuminated clearing, still being watched by thousands of people through the live stream that was still active. "You two have a choice now," Helen said, her voice cutting through the night air like a blade. "You can end this broadcast, publicly acknowledge what you've done, and try to negotiate a civilized divorce. Or you can continue this pathetic theater, and I guarantee that every second of this video will be used in court, in the media, and in every legal forum available to ensure you face the full consequences of your actions. The choice is yours." With that, she got into the car and drove away, leaving only a cloud of dust and the awkward silence of two manipulators whose plan had completely unraveled. During the drive back to the main house of the estate, Marina remained silent, looking out the window at the passing darkness, punctuated only by the occasional points of light from distant houses. The moon was waxing that night, casting silvery shadows over the pastures and fields that made up the family property. Marina knew every curve of that road, every landmark tree, every stone in the path. She had grown up playing on these lands, exploring every corner with her sisters, creating memories of a childhood that now seemed to belong to someone else. She thought about how Robert had deliberately chosen this place, her family's land, as the stage for her humiliation. It hadn't been a coincidence or a convenience. It had been a calculated choice to profane something sacred to her, to turn a place of happy memories into a place of trauma. Helen respected her daughter's silence for most of the journey, knowing she needed to process the trauma of what she had just experienced, that premature words of comfort might actually be intrusive at that moment. But as they neared the house, when the warm, welcoming lights of the colonial building appeared through the trees, Marina finally spoke, her voice small and filled with confusion. "Mom, how did you know? How did you find out what he was planning?" Helen sighed, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I didn't know specifically, honey, but I knew Robert well enough to know he was up to something. He's been increasingly aggressive in recent weeks, pressuring you about the land, making comments about your ability to be a mother. When I received that anonymous link to the broadcast, I just knew I had to act quickly." Marina turned to look at her mother, her eyes still shimmering with unshed tears. "Who do you think sent me the link?" Helen thought for a moment before answering. "I have my suspicions, but we need to be sure before making any accusations. The important thing now is you and the baby. We need to make sure you're both safe and healthy. First thing tomorrow, we'll go to the family lawyer and start the divorce proceedings, and we'll go to the doctor to make sure all this stress hasn't affected the pregnancy. When they arrived at the house, a sprawling colonial structure that had been the Hayes family home for 4 generations, Helen helped Marina out of the car. The house was lit up, and Marina could see through the windows that her younger sister Julia was there, pacing back and forth in the living room. As soon as they entered, Julia ran to hug Marina, her own tears flowing freely. "I saw everything, Murray. I was watching the stream. How could he do that to you? How could he be so cruel?" Marina hugged her younger sister, finding comfort in her presence. Julia had always been the most emotional of the 3 Hayes sisters, the most sensitive, and Marina knew she had suffered watching that public humiliation. Helen entered the room carrying a tray with chamomile tea and cookies. She always believed that the simple rituals of life helped anchor people during times of crisis. The 3 women sat together on the antique sofa in the living room, and for a few minutes they simply existed in the comfort of each other's company. It was Julia who broke the silence. "Marie, there's something you need to know. Something about Robert I discovered a few weeks ago." Marina looked at her sister with renewed attention. "What did you discover, Ju?" Julia exchanged a look with Helen, who nodded encouragingly. The younger sister took a deep breath, preparing to reveal something she had kept secret for weeks, carrying the weight of the knowledge alone while building a solid case. "I work at the county clerk's office, in the property records division, you know that. About 3 weeks ago, on a normal Tuesday morning, Robert showed up there. He was impeccably dressed, as always, but there was something in his eyes, a poorly disguised urgency that immediately put me on alert. He came with a full set of documents, all seemingly official, with notary seals and signatures, trying to start the process of transferring the estate's ownership to his name." Julia paused, her hands trembling slightly as she remembered the moment. "He claimed that you had signed a power of attorney, giving him full authority to conduct legal and financial transactions on your behalf. The documents were extremely convincing, Murray. If I didn't know you so well, if I didn't know you would never do something like that without consulting Mom first, I might have processed the paperwork without question. But something wasn't right. The signature looked like yours, but there were tiny inconsistencies, a slight difference, in the angle of the stroke on certain letters, an irregular pressure that didn't match your handwriting. I told Robert I would need to verify some details and that the process would take a few days. He became visibly nervous, pushing for it to be faster, even offering to pay for expedited processing fees that don't officially exist. That just confirmed my suspicions." Marina felt her blood run cold. "I never signed anything like that. Ever." Julia nodded quickly. "I know, Murray. That's why I blocked the process immediately and started an internal investigation. The documents were very well made forgeries, but there were inconsistencies in the signatures and the notary seals. I didn't tell you before because I was gathering evidence, building a solid case. I wanted to be absolutely sure before accusing your husband of something so serious." Helen set her teacup down with a sharp click. "Forgery of documents, attempted real estate fraud, and now this public humiliation farce. Robert Vance isn't just an unfaithful husband, he's a potential criminal." Marina felt a mixture of shock and, strangely, relief. For months she had felt like she was going crazy, that her perception that something was wrong was just paranoia or pregnancy hormones. Knowing that her intuitions were correct, that Robert really was as manipulative and dangerous as she had begun to suspect, was in a way liberating. But it was also terrifying, especially considering that in a few weeks she would bring a child into the world who would be genetically linked to this man forever. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. "How do I protect my baby from a father like that?" Helen placed a firm hand on her daughter's shoulder. "First, tomorrow morning we're going to Dr. Mendez for a full checkup. Then we're going to Mr. Carter's office, our lawyer. He's already waiting for our call. I alerted him while you were in the shower. We will document everything that happened today, include the evidence Julia collected about the attempted fraud, and we will file for a temporary restraining order against Robert. Your safety and the baby's safety are the absolute priority," Julia added, "and I'll continue my investigation at the county office. If Robert tried to forge documents once, it's possible he's attempted other frauds. The more evidence we have, the stronger our legal position will be. That night, Marina slept in her childhood bedroom, a space that hadn't changed much since she was a teenager. The walls were still the same light blue color she had chosen at 15. There were faded posters of bands she used to love, and the bookshelf was still filled with books she had devoured during the long, lazy summers of her youth. The single bed felt small now, especially with her 8-month belly, but somehow it was incredibly comforting. Marina was surrounded by memories of a simpler, more innocent time, when her biggest problem was deciding which dress to wear to the school dance or whether she should cut her hair short. Helen had insisted she stay at the estate for the foreseeable future, away from the apartment she shared with Robert in the city, and Marina agreed without any resistance. The thought of returning to that space, now contaminated by lies and betrayal, filled with memories she now knew to be completely false, was absolutely unbearable. Every object in that apartment would have a poisoned story. The sofa where they used to watch movies together, the kitchen where he made breakfast on weekends, the bed they shared. It was all a lie. As she tried to sleep, her hand resting protectively on her belly where the baby occasionally moved, giving little kicks that reminded her there was life and future despite everything, she thought about the inevitable and complicated future that awaited her. How she would explain all this to her child when he grew up, how she would raise a child knowing that half of his genetic makeup came from such a despicable man. But Marina also thought of her own strength, of how she had stood firm in that clearing when it would have been so easy to fall apart. She thought of her mother, who had turned what should have been a victory for Robert into a complete defeat through intelligence and preparation. She thought of Julia, who had risked her professional position to protect her family. Marina realized she wasn't alone, that she would never be alone. The baby would have a strong, protective and loving family, even if his father was absent or limited in his involvement. The next morning, Marina woke to the sound of voices coming from the kitchen. She went downstairs slowly, her hand sliding along the polished wooden banister, and found Helen, Julia, and a third person she didn't expect to see, Beatrice, her older sister, who had moved to New York years ago to work as a corporate lawyer. "Bea!" Marina exclaimed, rushing to hug her older sister. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice held Marina tightly, and when they pulled apart, Marina could see concern and determination in her sister's eyes. "Julia called me last night and told me everything. I caught the first flight this morning. Mari, I'm here to help. My specialty is corporate and family law, and I know some of the best high-conflict divorce attorneys in the country. We're going to make sure you and the baby get out of this with everything you deserve and need." The 4 Hayes women sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee. Helen had prepared a full breakfast, knowing they would all need energy for the day ahead. Beatrice opened her leather briefcase and spread documents across the table. "I've already started working on a few aspects of the case," she explained. "First, the good news. Last night's broadcast was a monumental mistake on Robert's part. He essentially created irrefutable evidence of emotional abuse, coercion, and malicious intent. Any judge who sees that video will immediately understand the kind of person he is." Beatrice continued, flipping through papers. "Furthermore, based on what Julia discovered about the attempted document fraud, we can argue that Robert poses a significant financial and legal risk. This will strengthen our request for full custody and protective orders. However," she paused, looking directly at Marina, "there's something you need to know. Robert isn't just an unfaithful and manipulative husband. My preliminary investigation has revealed that he's facing serious financial problems. His company is on the verge of bankruptcy. He's being sued by several creditors, and there are rumors of investigations for tax evasion. The attempt to gain access to the family lands wasn't just about ego or control. It was about financial survival." Marina felt the world spin around her. She had believed Robert was a successful businessman, that his real estate development company was thriving. She had signed some documents over the years, documents he said were routine, related to joint accounts and mutual investments. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. "He made me sign things," she said aloud. "Papers he said were for our future together. I didn't read them all carefully because I trusted him. Beatrice, is it possible he involved me in his frauds without my knowledge? Beatrice exchanged a serious look with Helen. It's possible, yes. And that's why we need to act fast. We need to ensure you are legally separated from him before any consequences of his actions fall on you as well. Helen stood up from the table and began pacing the kitchen, her mind clearly working at high speed. There's one more thing you all need to know, she said finally, about Victoria. Julia leaned forward, with interest. What about her, Mom? Helen took a deep breath. Victoria Cole is not who she says she is. 3 months ago, when Robert hired her as his executive assistant, I was suspicious. A young, beautiful woman with no apparent relevant experience in the field. So I hired a private investigator. She opened the drawer of an old cabinet and pulled out a thick folder, placing it on the table. Victoria was hired specifically to seduce Robert and help him in his plan to obtain the lands. But she's not working for Robert, she's working for someone else. The 3 daughters looked at Helen in shock. Working for whom? Marina asked, her voice tense. Helen opened the folder, revealing photos, bank records, and communication logs. She's working for New Horizon Development, an urban development company that has been trying to buy these lands for years. They knew I would never sell voluntarily, so they devised a more elaborate plan. Hire Victoria to infiltrate Robert's life, seduce a man they already knew was in financial trouble, and use him as a tool to destroy his marriage to Marina and create a situation where the lands could be sold as part of a divorce settlement or to pay off debts. Beatrice picked up the documents and began examining them with a professional eye. Mum, this is conspiracy. If you can prove all this, we're not just talking about a difficult divorce. We're talking about criminal charges against multiple parties. Helen nodded gravely. I know, and that's why we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. We have evidence, but we need to present it the right way, at the right time, and through the proper legal channels. Julia added, I can help with that. At the county office, we have records of all of New Horizons' attempts to acquire properties in this region. I can compile a history that demonstrates a pattern of predatory behavior. Marina felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was discovering. It wasn't just about an unfaithful husband. It was about a complex conspiracy involving fraud, manipulation, and attempted theft of family property. And she had been the centerpiece of this terrible game without even realizing it. How was I so blind? She whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. How did I not see any of this? Helen moved quickly to her daughters, sighed, wrapping her in a tight hug. You weren't blind, sweetheart, you were in love. You trusted someone who didn't deserve your trust, but that's not your fault. The fault lies with Robert, with Victoria, and with everyone who participated in this conspiracy. Beatrice began organizing the documents into neat piles. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Today, we go to Dr. Mendez to ensure you and the baby are healthy. Then, we go to the courthouse and start the divorce process based on an irreconcilable breakdown of trust and emotional abuse. Simultaneously, we'll file a formal complaint with the police about the attempted document fraud that Julia discovered. This will ensure everything is officially documented, and we will request temporary protective orders for you and the family properties. Marina wiped her tears and nodded. What about last night's broadcast? Is the video still online? Julia quickly checked her phone. It seems Robert finally took it down, but not before it was seen by over 50,000 people, and there are multiple copies circulating on social media. There's no way he can erase this completely now. Beatrice smiled for the first time that morning. Good. The more people who see it, the better for our case. Let him try to deny or downplay what he did when the whole world witnessed it. Helen poured more coffee for everyone. There's one thing I still don't understand, she said thoughtfully. Who sent me that link to the broadcast? Who made sure I could intervene in time? They all fell silent for a moment, considering the question. It was Julia who offered a theory. Maybe it was someone from New Horizon Development who had a change of heart. Or maybe an employee of Robert's who knew about the plan and didn't agree. With it? Beatrice shook her head. Or it could have been Victoria herself. Think about it. If her real goal was to ensure the plan failed spectacularly, creating a situation where Robert was completely discredited and Marina had solid grounds for divorce, then alerting Helen at the right moment would make sense. That way, New Horizon could eventually approach Helen directly with a purchase offer, positioning themselves as saviors after Robert caused all this trauma. Marina considered this possibility. So you're saying all of this, all the humiliation from last night, might have been orchestrated not just to hurt me, but to create a situation where you, Mom, would be desperate enough to sell the land? Helen smiled coldly. If that was their plan, then they seriously underestimated this family. We are not women who crumble under pressure. We grow stronger, and now we have not only morality on our side, but concrete evidence of a criminal conspiracy. New Horizon Development won't be getting anything but a nice federal investigation. The day proceeded as planned. The visit to Dr. Mendez confirmed that Marina and the baby were healthy, despite the stress of the previous night. The doctor recommended rest and close monitoring, considering she was entering her 9th month of pregnancy. At the police station, they filed a formal complaint and handed over all the evidence Julia had collected about the attempted fraud. The sheriff, a middle-aged man who had known the Hayes family for decades, took the case very seriously and promised to launch a full investigation. At the office of Mr. Carter, the family lawyer, they spent hours reviewing documents and legal strategies. The lawyer was confident they had an extremely strong case, and that Marina would have not only full custody of the child, but also robust legal and financial protection. When they finally returned to the estate in the late afternoon, they were all exhausted but feeling a sense of progress. Marina was about to rest when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, but something made her answer. "Hello?" A familiar female voice responded. "Marina, it's Victoria. Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you." Marina froze upon hearing Victoria's voice. Her first instinct was to hang up immediately, but Helen, who was beside her and could hear the voice through the accidental speakerphone, gently held her wrist and shook her head no. "Hear what she has to say," Helen whispered. "It could be important." Marina took a deep breath, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions the other woman's voice provoked. "What do you want, Victoria?" she asked, her voice cold but controlled. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice was filled with an urgency that hadn't been there the night before. "I need to meet you. I need to tell you the truth about everything that happened. You're in danger, Marina. Robert isn't just going to accept defeat. He's planning something worse." Marina exchanged a look with Helen, who nodded encouragingly. Beatrice and Julia had also moved closer, all of them now focused on the conversation. "Why should I believe anything you say?" Marina asked, keeping her tone firm. "You participated in the attempt to humiliate me publicly. You stood there next to Robert as he turned my suffering into entertainment for thousands of people." Victoria let out a heavy sigh. "I know. And you have every right to hate me. But nothing that happened last night was what it seemed. I wasn't there as Robert's mistress. I was there as an informant, working to document his actions so you could have all the evidence you needed to protect yourself." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Beatrice signaled to Marina and whispered, "Put it on speaker and let her talk. We want to hear this." Marina did as her sister suggested. "Victoria, you're on speaker now. My entire family is listening. If you have something important to say it now." Victoria hesitated for only a moment before continuing. "All right, you all deserve to know the full truth. My real name isn't Victoria Cole, it's Hannah Blake. I'm a private investigator specializing in corporate and marital fraud cases. I was hired 4 months ago by your mother, Helen, to infiltrate Robert's operation and gather evidence of his fraudulent activities." The 4 Hayes women looked at each other in absolute shock. It was Helen who broke the silence. "I didn't hire any investigator named Anna Blake. I hired Frank Miller from the Watchful Eye agency." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Victoria or Anna said carefully, "Frank Miller is my boss and mentor. He assigned me to this case, specifically because situations like this require a delicate and deep infiltration approach. He didn't mention it in the reports to protect my identity and my safety. This kind of undercover work is highly dangerous, especially when it involves men like Robert Vance, who don't hesitate to resort to intimidation when they feel threatened." Helen pulled out her own phone and quickly dialed a number. The others waited in tense silence as the call was answered. "Frank, this is Helen Hayes. I need immediate confirmation on something. Did you assign an investigator named Anna Blake to work undercover on the Vance case?" There was a pause as she listened. "Yes, she's on the phone with us now, claiming she works for you." Another pause. "I see. Yes, we are safe." She hung up and looked at her daughters. He confirmed it. Anna Blake really works for him, and he assigned her to infiltrate as Robert's assistant 4 months ago. He's on his way here now to explain personally why he kept this a secret from me. Marina felt as if the floor was spinning beneath her. "So, everything that happened last night was staged?" she asked into the phone, her voice trembling. Anna answered quickly. "Not exactly. Robert really planned that broadcast. He really intended to humiliate you publicly and use it as grounds for a custody case. My role was to encourage him to go forward with the plan instead of trying to stop him discreetly. I knew that if he executed the plan live in front of thousands of witnesses, he would create irrefutable evidence against himself. That's why I suggested doing the broadcast and helped set up the equipment. Every word he said, every action he took, was documented in a way that cannot be denied or distorted. In court, Beatrice, ever pragmatic and legally oriented, asked the critical question. "And the timing of our mother's intervention? You sent her that link, didn't you?" Anna confirmed. "Yes. I had 2 options. Intervene directly, which would have exposed my true identity, and possibly compromised the entire case, or ensure that Helen was aware and could intervene at the right moment. I chose the second option because I knew the intervention of a mother protecting her daughter would carry far more emotional and legal weight than that of a private investigator blowing her cover." Julia shook her head, processing all the information. "But you actually participated in the humiliation. You actually said those horrible things to Marina. How do you justify that?" Anna's voice grew quieter, filled with genuine remorse. "I can't fully justify it, and I won't try. What I did was necessary from an investigative standpoint, but I recognize that it caused real pain to an innocent person. Marina, I know this doesn't make up for the trauma you experienced, but I want you to know that every word I said last night made me feel sick. I have a young daughter at home. The thought of putting another woman, especially a pregnant one, through that went against all my instincts, but it was the only way to ensure Robert would incriminate himself completely." Marina closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't know if she felt relief, anger, or some confusing combination of both. Helen retook control of the situation. "Anna, you said Marina is in danger. Explain what you mean by that." Anna responded immediately. After Helen left with Marina last night, Robert had a complete meltdown. He realized that not only had he lost you, Marina, but also any chance of accessing the lands and any public credibility. He spent the entire night on the phone with lawyers, with New Horizon Development, and with people I couldn't fully identify. What I managed to overhear was concerning. He's talking about forcing a reconciliation, about questioning the child's paternity, about claiming Marina is mentally unstable and a danger to herself and the baby. He's desperate. And desperate men are dangerous, Beatrice interjected. "Does he have any legal basis for any of these claims?" Anna replied, "From an objective legal standpoint, no. But Robert has resources, he has connections, and he has the arrogance to believe he can manipulate any system in his favor. He's looking for doctors who can be persuaded to sign questionable psychological evaluations. He's looking for legal loopholes that could delay the divorce process. And more worryingly, he's asking questions about the security at the estate, about how many people live there, about access routes." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think he's planning to come here?" Anna hesitated before answering. "I think it's a real possibility you need to prepare for." Before anyone could respond, they heard the sound of tires on gravel outside. Helen rushed to the window and saw an unfamiliar car parking in the driveway. A middle-aged man in a professional suit got out, followed by a younger woman with short, dark hair, looking very different from the Victoria of the previous night. "It's Frank Miller and I assume the real Anna Blake," Helen announced. "I'll let them in." Anna, still on the phone, confirmed. "Yes, that's me. I changed my appearance as soon as I left that clearing last night. The blonde wig and colored contacts were part of the Victoria persona. I'm glad to be rid of her." Marina hung up the phone as Helen went to open the door. Frank Miller entered the room with a presence that commanded immediate respect. He was in his 50s, with well-cut grey hair and eyes that seemed to assess everything instantly. Behind him, Anna Blake looked surprisingly ordinary and approachable compared to the seductive and manipulative Victoria from the night before. Her clothes were practical, her face free of elaborate makeup, and her eyes showed a sharp intelligence. "Mrs. Hayes," he began formally, "I owe you a profound apology. I made the decision to keep Anna undercover without fully informing you, and I recognize that was a breach of trust. My only defense is that the fewer people who knew about the infiltration, the safer the operation would be, and the more authentic the evidence collected." Helen studied the investigator for a long moment before replying. "Frank, we've been working together for months. I trusted you with the safety and well-being of my family. To find out you kept something so significant a secret is deeply unsettling." Frank nodded, accepting the reprimand. "I understand completely, and if you decide to terminate our contract, I will respect that decision. But before you do, I implore you to allow me to fully explain the situation and present all the evidence Anna has collected. What we have goes beyond a simple case of infidelity or attempted fraud. What we have is a complex criminal conspiracy involving multiple corporate entities, large-scale document forgery, and possibly connections to even larger illegal activities." Beatrice, always focused on getting as much information as possible, gestured to the table. "Sit down. Let's hear everything you have." Frank and Anna joined them at the table, and Anna opened a laptop, beginning to project documents and recordings onto a portable screen she quickly set up. "What you are about to see and hear," she began, "represents 4 months of undercover work. Every conversation was recorded with prior legal authorization based on preliminary evidence of criminal activity. Every document was photographed and verified, and every connection between Robert Vance and New Horizon Development has been meticulously tracked. The first thing you need to understand is that Robert is not an innocent victim who was manipulated by New Horizon. He is an active and willing participant in the conspiracy. The next 90 minutes were a shocking revelation that completely reframed everything the Hayes women thought. They knew about the situation. The recordings, played in crystal-clear audio quality that left no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation, showed Robert in multiple meetings with New Horizon executives, openly discussing without any semblance of guilt or hesitation how he planned to gain control of the Hayes family lands through the marriage. In one particularly disturbing recording dated almost 6 years ago, before Robert had even officially met Marina, he was in a sleek conference room discussing strategies with Edward Sinclair. The CEO of New Horizon had clearly stated that the middle daughter would be the ideal target. "She's a romantic," Sinclair said on the recording, based on research the company had conducted on the family. "She's had a few failed relationships recently and is looking for stability. She'll be receptive to a successful, charming man who seems to offer financial and emotional security." Robert had laughed and replied that he could definitely be that man, that he was good at playing roles. There were emails detailing every step of the courtship plan, including suggestions on which restaurants to choose to impress her, what gifts to buy based on her known interests, and even scripts for romantic conversations he could use. One particularly nauseating email contained a psychological profile of Marina, compiled by a consultant New Horizon had hired, outlining her emotional vulnerabilities and how to exploit them. There were financial documents showing substantial and regular payments from New Horizon to Robert's personal account, disguised as investments in his real estate development company, but clearly functioning as ongoing bribes to keep him committed to the plan. The amounts were staggering, easily reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, and there were even more disturbing recordings of Robert discussing contingencies if the original plan failed, including the possibility of forging medical documents that would declare Marina unfit for motherhood. Marina listened to it all in a heavy, growing silence. Each revelation was like a precise stab to the heart, not because she still loved Robert. That feeling had been utterly destroyed and incinerated the night before in the clearing, but because every piece of evidence, every recording, every email showed how completely and methodically she had been deceived from the very beginning. It wasn't just the last few months that were a lie, but every year of her marriage, every tender moment she thought she had shared with him, every promise of eternal love he had whispered in her ear, every plan for the future they had made together, every shared laugh, every comforted tear. Absolutely everything had been a calculated performance, an elaborate lie serving a purpose far greater and more sinister than she could have ever imagined. She remembered the day he proposed, how perfect and romantic it had seemed. They were at a lookout point on the estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Robert had knelt, a diamond ring sparkling in his hand, and said all the right words about eternal love and building a life together. Marina had cried tears of joy, believing she had finally found someone who loved her deeply and genuinely. Now she knew that even that moment had been staged, that there was probably a checklist in some email from Sinclair telling him exactly where and how to propose for maximum emotional impact. The pain of this realization was almost physical, a sense of mourning not just for the lost relationship, but for the person she had been, for the innocence and ability to trust that had been stolen from her. When Anna finally paused the presentation, Marina looked at her directly. "When did you find all this out? When did you realize I had never been anything but a mark to him?" Anna met her eyes without flinching. "Within the first 2 weeks of the assignment. And that's why I committed completely to gathering enough evidence to ensure you could break free from him completely and protect your child." Helen asked the practical question. "How much of Robert's operation does New Horizon actually control?" Frank answered. "Everything. Robert's development company exists only on paper. Every project he claims to be developing is actually a New Horizon project using his name as a front. They intentionally keep him broke and desperate so that he remains under their control. The plan was always marry Marina, gain access to the Hayes lands through her, convince Helen to sell or transfer the properties, and then discard Robert once he was no longer useful. Last night's broadcast was not in their script. That was Robert acting on his own, driven by ego and desperation, and it was the mistake we needed him to make." Julia, who had remained quiet for most of the presentation, finally spoke. "What about the attempted document forgery I discovered at the county office? Was that also part of the larger operation?" Frank nodded. "Yes. Robert attempted that forgery as a plan B. After it became clear Helen wouldn't be manipulated into selling voluntarily. He thought he could simply steal the lands through document fraud. What he didn't expect was that the daughter of the woman he was trying to deceive worked in the very department where he would try to execute the fraud." Anna added, "And it was your intervention, Julia, that accelerated Robert's need to do something dramatic and desperate, leading to last night's broadcast." Beatrice flipped through the documents that had been printed out. "So we have evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, bribery, and possibly even marriage under false pretenses. Frank, is this enough for criminal charges?" Frank confirmed. "Absolutely. We have already delivered copies of all this evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office. There is an active investigation underway, not only against Robert, but against New Horizon Development and several of its executives. What happened here at St. Clair's estate is just one small part of a much larger scheme of rural land appropriation throughout the region." Helen felt a grim satisfaction. "So they won't just lose this battle. They will face serious criminal consequences." "Exactly," Frank confirmed. Marina rubbed her belly, feeling the baby move within her. "What about my safety and my child's safety? If Robert is desperate and New Horizon is under investigation, they won't just accept defeat," Anna replied. "You are absolutely right to be concerned. That's why we're here. We recommend enhanced security on the estate, at least until the restraining orders are formalized, and until we have more clarity on Robert's intentions. I have already coordinated with a reputable security firm that can have guards here within 2 hours," Frank added. "And beyond physical security, We need to ensure that all communication from Robert trying to contact you is documented but not answered. Any attempt to approach needs to be treated as a potential violation of the protective orders we are requesting. The sun was beginning to set when the meeting finally concluded. Frank and Anna left with the promise to return the next day with additional updates and to coordinate with the security team. The four Hayes women were left alone again, but this time with a much more complete understanding of the situation they were in. Helen served fresh tea for everyone, and they sat on the porch watching the familiar landscape of the estate bathed in the golden light of dusk. For a long moment, no one spoke, each lost in her own thoughts. Finally, it was Marina who broke the silence. "I don't want my son to grow up knowing this story. I don't want him to know he was conceived as part of a criminal plan, that his father never truly loved me, that I was just a mark in an elaborate con." Helen put an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "What your son will know," she said gently, "is that he was born to a strong woman who refused to be a victim. He will know that when faced with betrayal and manipulation, his mother did not fall apart. She fought back. He will grow up surrounded by a family of powerful women who protect each other and who turned an attempt to destroy them into a complete victory." Beatrice agreed. "And legally, we will ensure that Robert has minimal visitation rights, if any at all. With the evidence we have, we can argue that he poses a psychological and emotional risk to the child," Julia added with a sad smile. "And as for New Horizon, they're going to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the women of the Hayes family." That night, as Marina finally lay down to sleep in her childhood room, she felt a strange and unexpected peace settle in her chest. There was still so much ahead, legal battles that would stretch for months or perhaps years, the impending birth that brought its own anxieties and fears, the need to rebuild her life from scratch and redefine who she was outside, the context of being Robert Vance's wife. She would have to deal with the emotional fallout of the trauma, process the magnitude of the betrayal, and learn to trust her own judgment again, which had been so completely betrayed. But for the first time since she discovered the truth about Robert, since that terrible moment in the clearing when the veil was finally torn from her eyes and she saw the monster behind the charming mask, she felt real and genuine hope pulsing in her heart. She was not alone on this journey of recovery and rebuilding. She never would be. She had Helen, who had proven time and again that she was a force of nature, capable of moving mountains to protect her daughters. She had Beatrice, with her sharp legal mind and her unwavering determination to secure justice. She had Julia, with her fierce loyalty and her willingness to risk even her professional career to expose the truth. And in a few weeks, she would have her son, a small, new, innocent life that represented not the legacy of Robert's lies, but the future of the Hayes family. Her son would be born into a family that knew how to fight when necessary, how to weather storms that would destroy others, how to rise from the ashes stronger than before, and how to turn adversity into strength and wisdom. 2 weeks had passed since that revealing meeting on the porch. The St. Clair's estate had transformed into an efficient yet discreet fortress, with professional security teams monitoring all access points. Marina had adapted to the new routine, finding comfort in the constant presence of her family. Beatrice had decided to work remotely from Virginia for the time being, and Julia took a temporary leave from the county office to help. The three sisters and Helen had become an unbreakable unit, each contributing their unique skills to protect Marina and prepare for the baby's arrival. The divorce proceedings were moving forward quickly. With the evidence presented by Frank and Anna, the judge had granted temporary restraining orders prohibiting Robert from approaching Marina or the property. New Horizon Development was under federal investigation, and several of its executives had been indicted. Robert was facing multiple criminal charges, from document forgery to conspiracy to commit fraud. His carefully constructed world of lies was collapsing spectacularly, and the downfall was being documented by the national media with increasing intensity. Marina was now in her 40th week of pregnancy, technically able to go into labor at any moment. Dr. Mendez made regular visits to the estate, carefully monitoring her progress and the baby's well-being. On that particular Tuesday morning, Marina woke up feeling restless, Something in the air felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't define. She went down for breakfast and found Helen already in the kitchen, making fresh biscuits, the familiar aroma instantly comforting Marina. "Good morning, Mom," she said, sitting at the table with some difficulty due to her enormous belly. "How did you sleep?" Helen smiled, pouring coffee for her daughter. "Well enough. And you, honey? You have a strange look on your face." Marina was about to answer when she felt a contraction, not painful, but definitely present. She placed a hand on her belly and took a deep breath. "I think it might be today," she said calmly. "The baby is very active this morning, and I'm having light contractions." Helen immediately switched into efficient action mode. "Julia, call Dr. Mendez," she instructed her youngest daughter, who had just entered the kitchen. "Beatrice, check if the hospital bag is ready and bring it to the living room. We'll monitor the contractions and decide when it's time to go to the hospital." But before anyone could move, the house's landline rang. Helen answered, and her expression changed drastically as she listened. "I see. Keep him there. Do not let him approach the house under any circumstances. We're on our way." She hung up and looked at her daughters with a mixture of anger and determination. "Robert is at the main gate, demanding entry. The security team is holding him, but he's making a scene, screaming that he has rights as a father and a husband." Marina felt her blood run cold. Today? He chose today to show up? Beatrice was already on the phone with their lawyer, Mr. Carter, quickly explaining the situation. "Yes, he's violating the restraining order. No, he's not being physically violent, but he's being extremely disruptive." "All right, I'll document everything." She began recording video as Helen made a quick decision. "Julia, you stay here with Marina. Beatrice and I will go to the gate and deal with Robert. The police have been called and should be on their way. Marina, you need to stay calm for the baby. Don't let that man steal anything more from you. Not even your peace on the day your son decides to be born." Marina nodded, placing both hands protectively on her belly. Helen and Beatrice left in the estate's car, heading toward the main gate, which was nearly a mile from the house. When they arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Robert was outside the closed gate, visibly agitated and shouting at the two security guards. Beside him stood an older, well-dressed man, whom Helen recognized from photos as the CEO of New Horizon Development, Edward Sinclair. His presence there confirmed Helen's worst suspicions. Robert was not acting alone in this last desperate attempt. Helen got out of the car with Beatrice, who continued to record everything discreetly. "Robert," she said in a firm voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "you are violating a court-ordered restraining order. You need to leave here immediately." Robert turned to her, and Helen could see the desperation and rage burning in his eyes. "That's my wife," he yelled. "That's my son who's about to be born. You can't keep me away from my own family." Edward Sinclair stepped forward, his voice calculatedly calm in contrast to Robert's. "Mrs. Hayes, perhaps we can resolve this in a civilized manner. Mr. Vance here simply wants to be present for the birth of his child. Surely that is a basic human right." Helen turned her cold eyes to Sinclair. "And you, Mr. Sinclair, what are you doing here? This is a family matter that does not concern you, unless, of course, you are publicly admitting your involvement in the conspiracy to defraud my family." Beatrice raised her phone slightly, making it clear that the recording was capturing every word. Sinclair's mask slipped, for just a moment, revealing frustration before he recomposed his expression. "I am here as a friend and business advisor to Robert. Nothing more." Beatrice laughed without humor. "A friend and advisor who is currently under federal investigation for multiple charges of fraud and conspiracy. Mr. Sinclair, I strongly suggest you leave before your presence here is interpreted as an attempt to intimidate witnesses." In the distance, the sound of sirens began to approach. Robert, realizing he was running out of time, changed tactics. His voice lowered, becoming almost pleading. "Marina, I know you can hear me through them. Please. I made terrible mistakes, I admit that. But this baby is my son. Let me be there. Let me at least meet my son when he's born." Helen was about to respond when her phone rang. It was Julia, and her voice was urgent. "Mom, Marina's contractions are getting stronger and more frequent. Dr. Mendez is here and says We need to get her to the hospital now. The baby is coming." Helen turned back to the car without another word to Robert or Sinclair. Beatrice followed her mother, but not before saying to the guards, "The police are on their way. Keep these two men here until the officers arrive and can properly handle the violation of the restraining order." As they sped back to the house, Helen called Frank Miller. "I need you and Anna to meet us at St. Mary's Hospital in Charlottesville. Robert showed up here violating the restraining order, and I don't trust that he won't try something at the hospital. I need additional security there." Frank assured her they would be there in less than an hour. Back at the house, Marina was breathing through contractions which were now coming every 7 minutes. She was scared but also strangely calm. Julia held her hand, offering words of encouragement, while Dr. Mendez prepared his medical instruments and checked Marina's vitals one more time. "Is the baby okay?" Marina asked, her voice strained with pain. Dr. Mendez smiled reassuringly. "Everything is fine, Marina. The baby's heartbeat is strong and regular. You are having a perfectly normal labor. I'm confident that in a few hours you will meet your son." When Helen and Beatrice arrived, they quickly helped Marina into the car. The journey to the hospital took 40 minutes, during which the contractions continued to increase in intensity and frequency. At St. Mary's Hospital, the staff was waiting and quickly settled Marina into a private birthing suite that Helen had reserved in advance. Dr. Mendez examined Marina and announced that she was dilating well and that the baby would likely be born within the next 3 to 4 hours. Helen, Beatrice, and Julia took turns staying with Marina, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, and offering words of encouragement and love. Marina fought through each wave of pain, thinking of all the suffering she had endured in recent weeks, and finding strength in it. If she had survived Robert's betrayal, the public humiliation, and the discovery of the conspiracy against her family, she could certainly face labor. Each contraction brought her closer to meeting her son, and that motivation was more powerful than any physical pain. Frank and Anna arrived as promised and discreetly positioned additional security in the hospital corridors. About 2 hours after Marina was admitted, a nurse came to Helen in the waiting room with a worried expression. "Mrs. Hayes, there's a man at the front desk claiming to be the patient's husband and demanding access. Our staff is refusing entry based on the instructions you provided and the restraining order, but he's creating a considerable scene." Helen sighed heavily. Robert simply would not give up. She went to the reception area, accompanied by Frank and Anna, and found Robert arguing heatedly with the hospital staff. When he saw Helen, his eyes blazed. "You can't keep me from my own son," he shouted, drawing the attention of other patients and visitors in the lobby. Frank stepped forward, showing his ID and official documentation. "Mr. Vance, you are in direct violation of a court-ordered restraining order. The police have been notified of your current location. I strongly recommend you leave voluntarily before more severe intervention is required." But Robert seemed beyond reason. He tried to push past Frank toward the elevators, but the hospital security guards quickly intercepted him. It was at this moment of maximum chaos that something completely unexpected happened. Anna, who had been observing the scene with professional attention, noticed a man in the shadows near the hospital entrance. She recognized him immediately from surveillance photos. It was Ricardo Mendonça, the personal lawyer for New Horizon Development, known for his questionable methods and willingness to cross ethical lines. She signaled to Frank, who immediately understood the implication. Robert wasn't just there as a desperate father. He was being used as a distraction. Anna moved quickly, circling the area while keeping the man in her peripheral vision. Frank discreetly alerted hospital security to a possible secondary threat. It was then that Anna saw Ricardo Mendonça pull out a folder of documents and start moving toward the hospital's administrative sector. She intercepted him smoothly but firmly. "Mr. Mendonça, can we have a word?" The lawyer tried to pretend he didn't know her, but Anna continued in a low but clear voice. "I know exactly who you are and what you're doing here. You're trying to access Marina Hayes' medical records, possibly to forge documents declaring her unfit for motherhood. That is not only illegal, but also a further violation of medical privacy laws. Ricardo Mendonça paled, realizing his mission had been compromised before it even began. Frank joined them quickly, and this time the police did arrive, responding to both the call about Robert and the alert about Ricardo Mendonça. Both men were escorted out of the hospital, Robert shouting empty threats, Mendonça silently calculating his legal options. Helen watched it all with a grim satisfaction. They had tried one last desperate gambit and failed completely. New Horizon Development and its allies were finished. She returned to the birthing suite, where Marina was now in the most intense phase of labor. Julia held one of Marina's hands while Beatrice held the other. Dr. Mendez was in position and ready. "It's almost time," he announced. "Marina, on the next contraction, I want you to push with all the strength you have." Marina gathered all her strength, all her anger, all her determination, all her hope, and she pushed. And pushed again. And again. The contractions were intense, the pain was overwhelming, but she was so close. So close to meeting her son, so close to starting a new chapter of her life, free from Robert's lies and manipulations. With one final monumental effort that summoned all the strength she didn't even know she possessed, Marina pushed with every fiber of her being, every muscle in her body working in harmony to bring her son into the world. She felt the baby leave her body, a sensation of physical and emotional relief so intense it almost knocked her out, and immediately the air was filled with the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. A strong, healthy, indignant cry. The cry of her son announcing his entry into the world. "A boy," Dr. Mendez announced with a radiant smile that lit up his entire face, his voice filled with the genuine emotion that comes from decades of bringing new life into the world. "Congratulations, Marina. You have a beautiful, perfectly healthy son." He quickly but gently cleaned the baby, checking all his reflexes and vital signs with the practical efficiency of an experienced professional, and then placed him directly on Marina's chest, skin to skin as best medical practices recommended. Marina immediately began to cry, tears of physical relief, overwhelming joy, and absolute, unconditional love pouring from her eyes and streaming down her face. These were not the tears of pain and betrayal she had shed in the clearing, nor the tears of processing trauma that had come in the following weeks. These were tears of pure and simple happiness, of a mother's love that flooded every cell of her body with an intensity she had not been prepared to feel. The baby was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, curious dark eyes that seemed to already be trying to focus on his mother's face, and a shock of damp dark hair. Marina held him against her, feeling his warmth, his weight, his reality. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mommy, and I promise you, I will protect you, I will love you, and I will show you what it means to be strong and good." Helen, Beatrice, and Julia crowded around Marina and the baby, all crying tears of happiness. This was a new beginning, a new generation. Proof that even from the darkest and most difficult situations, something beautiful and pure could emerge. Dr. Mendez allowed the family a few private moments before completing the necessary medical procedures. When he returned to examine the baby, he performed all the standard checks and declared the boy perfectly healthy, with an excellent weight and all normal vital signs. Later that evening, as Marina rested in her private room, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, Helen entered with an expression Marina couldn't quite decipher. "Mom, what happened?" Marina asked, immediately alert. Helen sat on the edge of the bed and took Marina's free hand. "Honey, there's something important you need to—" "No, something I found out a few weeks ago but was waiting for the right moment to tell you." Marina felt her heart race. "What is it?" Helen took a deep breath. "I had Frank run a discreet paternity test. He collected Robert's DNA from some personal items he had left at your old house, and he also collected your DNA and ran a broad genetic test." Marina was confused. "Why? What did you find out?" Helen looked deep into her daughter's eyes. "Robert is not the baby's biological father." Marina's world stopped. "What? But that's impossible. I would never." Helen interrupted gently. "I know, honey. It wasn't infidelity. It was something very different. Do you remember those prenatal vitamins Robert insisted you take? The ones he bought from a specific pharmacy and always brought you himself? Marina nodded slowly, her mind racing. Helen continued. Those weren't just vitamins. Frank discovered they contained a combination of hormones and supplements designed to alter your fertility in specific ways. Robert was planning to secretly do an in vitro fertilization, using your egg but the sperm of a donor paid for by New Horizon Development. The goal was to have a child. That looked enough like you to not raise immediate suspicion, but who had no real genetic connection to Robert. That way, when he eventually requested a paternity test as part of the divorce plan, he could claim you had cheated on him, further strengthening his case for custody and control of the properties. Marina felt as if she were falling, even though she was lying down. So my son, he's not Robert's son. Helen shook her head. Genetically, no. The baby's DNA matches yours completely, but the other half comes from an anonymous donor. However, she squeezed Marina's hand tightly, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that this baby is yours, he is loved, he is wanted, and he has no legal or genetic connection to Robert Vance. Marina looked at the sleeping baby in her arms, processing this final, shocking piece of information. Part of her was horrified by the manipulation, by the level of control Robert had exerted over her own body, without her knowledge or consent. But another part of her felt a deep and unexpected relief. Her son did not carry the DNA of a cruel and manipulative man. He was hers, completely hers, and the families that loved and protected her. So Robert has no legal rights to him? Marina asked, hope rising in her voice. Helen smiled. None. Legally, he's still listed as the father for now, because you were still married when the baby was conceived. But with this DNA test, we can contest that. Robert will have no paternity claim, no visitation rights, and no access to your son whatsoever. You are completely free of him, Marina. Completely. Marina began to cry, but this time they were tears of pure relief and gratitude. She looked around the room at her mother, at her sisters who had quietly entered during the revelation, and at the baby in her arms. You saved us both, she said with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. Julia came over and kissed Marina's forehead. You don't have to thank us. This is what family does, Beatrice agreed. And now we're going to make sure that Robert, New Horizon Development, and everyone involved in this conspiracy faces complete justice. Helen held her grandson for the first time, looking down at the baby's perfect face. What are you going to name him? She asked Marina. Marina thought. For a moment, looking at the son who represented not a legacy of betrayal and lies, but of strength and survival. Gabriel, she said finally. Gabriel Hayes, grandson of Helen, nephew of Beatrice and Julia, son of Marina. He is a Hayes, through and through, and he will grow up knowing only love, truth, and strength. In the days that followed, the full story unfolded in the national media. The New Horizon Development conspiracy was exposed in all its complexity and cruelty. Robert Vance was indicted on multiple criminal charges, including fraud, document forgery, and even non-consensual administration of substances, based on the altered vitamins he had given Marina. Edward Sinclair and several other New Horizon executives were arrested. Ricardo Mendonça lost his license to practice law. The company itself completely collapsed financially, its properties and assets seized as part of the criminal investigations. Marina obtained her divorce with remarkable speed, and with the DNA tests, all of Robert's rights as a father were legally removed. Gabriel was officially registered as having only one parent, Marina Hayes, with the father's space left blank. The St. Clair's estate remained securely in the family's hands, and the lands continued to thrive under Helen's careful management. 6 months later, Marina was sitting on the porch of the estate house, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had found a new version of herself in the months since his birth, a version that was stronger, wiser, and paradoxically softer. She had learned that being strong didn't mean being hard, that trusting again was possible even after betrayal, and that family was everything. Helen joined her on the porch, bringing fresh lemonade. "How are you feeling, honey?" she asked. Marina smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. I'm good, Mom. Really good. I look at Gabriel and I don't see any of the past, only the future. He's a blank page, a chance to get everything right. And with you, Beatrice, and Julia by my side, I know I can do it. Helen sat beside her daughter, placing an arm around her shoulders. You were always stronger than you knew. Robert tried to break you, but all he did was reveal the steel that was always inside you. Later that night, when the estate was quiet and the stars shone brightly in the light pollution-free sky, Marina wrote a letter to Gabriel. A letter he would read when he was older. In it she told the whole story, not sparing details, but also not dwelling on bitterness. She wrote about betrayal, but also about redemption, about manipulation, but also about truth, about pain, but also about healing. And above all, she wrote about love, about the family that had fought for her, about the strength that came from women who refused to be victims, and about the hope that a new beginning could bring. She ended the letter with a promise. My dearest Gabriel, you were born from circumstances that tried to destroy me, but you are the proof that light can emerge from darkness. You will never know the man who tried to use your conception as a weapon, and that is a blessing. You will know only love, truth, and the unbreakable strength of the Hayes family. And when you are old enough to understand this story, I hope it teaches you that no matter what life throws your way, you always have a choice about who you become.